The hegemony battalion's confidence evaporated shot by shot. Sarah worked methodically through her target list, prioritizing officers, heavy weapons teams, and equipment that posed the greatest threat to her squad mates. Each .50 caliber round found its mark with devastating precision, turning advanced combat armor into useless scrap metal. The enemy forces tried everything they could think of. They spread out to make targeting more difficult, but the Barrett's range meant nowhere on the asteroid was safe. They tried to locate Sarah's position using sensor equipment, but she had chosen her spot too well and moved frequently enough to avoid detection. Most desperately, they tried to advance on the mining station, hoping to use Squad 7 as hostages. This proved to be their costliest mistake. "Chun, they're moving on our position," Mills reported. "About 40 troops advancing from the north landing zone." "I see them," Sarah replied, tracking the assault force through her scope. They were moving in professional formation, using available cover and advancing by fire and movement. Under normal circumstances, 40 heavily armed troops would be more than enough to overrun a 5-person squad. But Sarah had clear lines of sight on their entire approach route. Her shots came at precise intervals, each one dropping a hegemony soldier before he could reach the next piece of cover. The .50 caliber rounds didn't just penetrate their armor, they destroyed it completely, often taking out soldiers behind the primary target through overpenetration. The assault stalled, then broke completely as the surviving troops retreated to their original positions. "This is impossible," came a transmission on the open channel, apparently from a hegemony officer who had lost control of his communications discipline. "How is one primitive weapon destroying an entire battalion?" Sarah paused in her targeting to respond. "Because you forgot the most important rule of warfare. It's not the weapon that wins the fight. It's the warrior holding it." Aboard the cruiser Shadowblade, Captain Vorthek was receiving reports he could barely believe. His ground forces, equipped with the most advanced weapons and armor the hegemony could provide, were being systematically annihilated by what appeared to be a single human with an antique rifle. "Status report," he demanded from his tactical officer. 68% casualties, sir. We've lost 4 dropships, 3 heavy weapons teams, and most of our officer corps. The remaining forces are pinned down and unable to advance. What about the human's position? Can we target her from orbit? Negative, sir. She's moving constantly, and any orbital bombardment would also destroy the crystal deposits we came here to secure. Captain Vorthak studied the tactical display with growing frustration. The human strategy was elegant in its simplicity. She had turned the hegemony's superior numbers into a liability by forcing them to fight on her terms. "Deploy the reserve mechs," he finally ordered. "Send in the heavy assault units." Back on the asteroid's surface, Sarah watched through her scope as new landing craft descended from the cruiser. These were larger ships, carrying the kind of heavy equipment that had originally been intended for mining operations but could be repurposed for combat. 6 new assault mechs, larger and more heavily armored than the ones she had destroyed in the mining station, deployed onto the surface. These units had been modified based on the earlier battle reports, with additional armor plating around their critical systems and redundant targeting arrays. "Chun, they've adapted to your tactics," Geisers warned. "Those mechs have been upgraded specifically to counter kinetic weapons." Sarah studied the new threats through her scope. The hegemony engineers had done good work. The mech's vital components were much better protected now, and their movement patterns suggested they had been programmed with her previous targeting preferences in mind, but they had made one critical error in their analysis. "Squad 7, I need you to create another diversion," Sarah transmitted. "Get them to focus on the mining station again." "What are you planning?" Mills asked. "They've protected their mechs against the Springfield's ammunition," Sarah explained, "but they're still thinking in terms of the weapons they know. They've never seen what a Barrett can do to really heavy armor." The mechs began their advance on the mining station in a coordinated formation, their thick armor plates gleaming as they reflected the cruiser's searchlights. Their tactical computers had calculated optimal approaches that minimized exposure to kinetic weapons fire while maximizing their own offensive capabilities. Sarah let them close to within 1 kilometer before she opened fire. The difference was immediately apparent. Where her Springfield rounds had required precise shots at vulnerable points, the Barrett's .50 caliber rounds simply punched through the mech's armor wherever they hit. The first shot took the head off the lead mech, the massive bullet continuing through the torso and exiting the back in a shower of sparks and debris. The second shot struck another mech center mass. The kinetic impact so severe it lifted the 12-foot-tall machine off its feet and sent it crashing backward into a rocky outcropping. The remaining mechs tried to scatter, but they were too close and too large to avoid Sarah's targeting. Within 3 minutes, all 6 lay destroyed on the asteroid's surface, their advanced technology reduced to smoking scrap, metal by bullets that had been designed over 4 centuries earlier. The silence that followed was profound. On the asteroid's surface, the surviving hegemony troops huddled behind inadequate cover, unwilling to move. Aboard the Shadowblade, Captain Vorthak stared at his tactical display in disbelief. It was Mills who finally broke the quiet. Shadowblade. This is Squad 7. Are you ready to discuss terms for your withdrawal? The response took several minutes to come. When it did, Captain Vorthak's voice had lost all its earlier arrogance. Squad 7, this is Captain Vorthak. We request permission to evacuate our surviving personnel. Granted, Mills replied. But leave the crystals. And Captain? You might want to update your tactical databases? The galaxy just got a reminder that humans didn't earn their place among the stars by being harmless. As the hegemony forces retreated to their cruiser and departed the system, Sarah finally allowed herself to relax. She had fired 37 rounds from the Barrett, and every shot had counted. More importantly, she had sent a message that would spread throughout the galaxy. When Squad 7 returned to the Outer Rim station, they found themselves the center of attention from species across the galaxy. The story of the human who had defeated an entire hegemony battalion with primitive weapons spread quickly through military channels. Colonel Vex met them at the docking bay, his scarred reptilian features showing an expression Sarah had never seen before: respect. "Chun," he said as she shouldered her rifle, "I owe you an apology. I thought you were just another stubborn human who didn't know when she was outclassed." Sarah smiled as she walked past him toward the armory. "No apology necessary, sir. It's an easy mistake to make. What will you do now?" Zeph asked, still trying to process everything he had witnessed. "You could write your own assignment, go anywhere in the galaxy." Sarah considered the question as she began the familiar ritual of cleaning and maintaining her rifles. Around her, other soldiers stopped to watch, no longer seeing a human with primitive weapons, but a warrior who had proven that sometimes the oldest solutions were still the best ones. "I think I'll stay right here," she said finally. "Someone needs to teach the rest of the galaxy that there's more to winning a fight than having the fanciest equipment." As word of the battle spread, recruitment stations throughout the galaxy began receiving unusual requests. Species that had previously dismissed kinetic weapons started asking about availability and training programs. The galactic arms market saw a sudden spike in demand for projectile weapons, with manufacturers struggling to understand designs that hadn't been used in combat for centuries. But perhaps most importantly, the laughter had stopped. No one was mocking the humans anymore, or questioning their place among the galactic community. The galaxy had been reminded of an important truth. It wasn't the sophistication of the weapon that mattered, but the skill, determination, and ingenuity of the being who wielded it. And in those qualities, humans had never been surpassed. Sarah Chun continued to serve with Battalion 12, training other soldiers in the ancient art of precision marksmanship. Her rifles, both the elegant Springfield and the massive Barrett, became legendary throughout the Outer Rim. Stories were told of the human who could reach out across impossible distances and touch enemies that thought themselves safe. The hegemony, for their part, began developing new armor specifically designed to defend against kinetic weapons. But by then, it was too late. The damage to their reputation was done, and other species began questioning whether the Hegemony's technological superiority was as absolute as they had claimed. In the end, Sarah had accomplished something far more important than winning a single battle. She had proven that in a galaxy obsessed with the latest technology, sometimes the oldest traditions held the greatest power, sometimes the old ways were still the best ways. The recruitment station on Kepler 442b buzzed with activity as beings from across the galaxy lined up to join the Galactic Defense Force. Towering Vorthak warriors displayed their natural chitinous armor, while sleek Xantharian soldiers demonstrated their plasma rifles with practiced ease. The air hummed with energy weapons, advanced combat suits, and technology that could level mountains. Sarah Chun stood in line, her worn duffel bag slung over one shoulder. At 5 feet 6 inches, she looked impossibly small next to the alien warriors surrounding her. Her plain military fatigues bore the faded insignia of the Earth Defense Corps, and her weathered face showed the lines of someone who had seen too much combat. A massive Krugan officer, standing nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms and crystalline skin that reflected the station's lights, processed the recruits. His deep voice rumbled through the universal translator as he examined each candidate's equipment and credentials. When the Vorthak ahead of Sarah stepped forward, the officer's mandibles clicked with approval. The insectoid warrior carried an ion cannon capable of punching through starship hull plating, and his natural exoskeleton could withstand direct plasma hits. "Excellent specimen," the Krugan noted, stamping the acceptance forms. "Report to Battalion 7. The Xantharian was next, her slim blue form crackling with bioelectric energy. She carried no visible weapons, but everyone knew her species could generate lightning powerful enough to disable vehicles. "Outstanding abilities," the officer confirmed. "Battalion 3 needs someone with your talents." Then it was Sarah's turn. She stepped forward and placed her bag on the inspection table. The Krugan officer looked down at her with what might have been confusion, his crystalline features shifting. "Species identification?" he asked. "Human, Earthborn." A ripple of laughter went through the nearby recruits. Humans were known throughout the galaxy, but not for their combat prowess. They were traders, diplomats, sometimes engineers. They were the species that brought coffee and music to the galaxy, not the ones who fought wars. "And your combat experience?" the officer continued, though his tone suggested he was already preparing a rejection. 15 years active duty. 3 major conflicts. Specialist marksman." The officer's 4 eyes focused on her bag. "Present your primary weapon for inspection." Sarah unzipped her duffel and pulled out what looked like an antique. It was a bolt-action rifle, clearly human-made, with a wooden stock that showed decades of careful maintenance. The metal was well-oiled but showed the wear of constant use. Compared to the energy weapons and plasma cannons around them, it looked like something from a museum. The laughter grew louder. A young Vorthak recruit clicked his mandibles in amusement. "Is that a projectile weapon? Do you hunt small game with that primitive thing?" Even the Krugan officer seemed taken aback. "This is your primary combat weapon." "It appears to be quite old." Sarah's expression never changed. She had heard this reaction before. "It's a model 1903 Springfield. My great-grandfather carried it in the Pacific Theater. My grandfather took it to Korea. My father carried it in the Resource Wars. It's been in my family for over 2 centuries. "But it fires metal projectiles," a Xantharian recruit interjected, her bioluminescent patches pulsing with mirth. "How do you expect to penetrate modern armor with such antiquated technology?" The question hung in the air. Around them, recruits from dozens of species watched with growing amusement. The humans were known for their stubbornness and their strange attachment to primitive customs. But this was beyond eccentric. This was foolish. Sarah looked around at the assembled warriors, at their advanced weapons and superior genetics. She had seen that look before, in the eyes of enemies who had underestimated her species. The same arrogance, the same assumption that newer always meant better. "I've found that it's not always about the weapon," she said quietly. "Sometimes it's about who's holding it." The Krugan officer consulted his datapad, clearly struggling with how to handle this situation. Humans were allies of the Galactic Federation, so he couldn't simply reject her application. But sending someone armed with such primitive equipment into combat against the hegemony forces seemed like a death sentence. "Human Chun," he finally said, "while I admire your traditional approach to warfare, I must inform you that our enemies possess advanced shielding, powered armor, and energy weapons. Your projectile weapon would be ineffective against such technology." Sarah nodded politely. "I understand your concern, sir. But I'd like to request assignment to active combat duty nonetheless." "Very well," the officer sighed, clearly expecting this to be a short deployment. "Report to Battalion 12. They're scheduled for patrol duty in the Outer Rim. Light resistance expected." As Sarah shouldered her rifle and gathered her gear, the laughter followed her across the station. A human with an antique rifle, assigned to the unit that got the safest missions. It would be a story they'd tell for years about the stubborn, little species that didn't know when it was outclassed, but as she walked away, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. She had heard that laughter before on a dozen different worlds, from enemies who thought they understood what humans were capable of. They always learned better. Eventually, the galaxy was about to get a reminder of why humans had earned their place among the stars, one carefully aimed shot at a time. The transport ship Stellar Wind carried Sarah and 50 other new recruits toward the Outer Rim territories. During the 3-day journey, she found herself increasingly isolated. The other recruits had formed groups based on species and weapon compatibility, practicing combat formations and discussing tactics for their advanced equipment. Sarah spent most of her time in the cargo bay, methodically cleaning and maintaining her rifle. The repetitive motions were soothing, and the familiar weight of the weapon in her hands reminded her of home. Other recruits would sometimes pass by and shake, their heads in bewilderment at the human obsessing over her primitive firearm. On the second day, a young Altarian named Zeph approached her. His species resembled tall, elegant cats with silver fur and large golden eyes. He carried a sophisticated energy rifle that could switch between different types of ammunition depending on the target. "I'm curious," Zeph said, settling nearby with natural feline grace. "Your weapon appears to be purely mechanical. No energy source, no guided projectiles, no adaptive targeting. How do you compensate for planetary gravity differences? Atmospheric density variations? Target movement prediction?" Sarah looked up from her rifle, considering how to explain. "Practice. Lots and lots of practice. My father taught me that a good marksman learns to read the environment. Wind speed, humidity, temperature, gravity. You feel it all and adjust accordingly. But that would take years to master for each different world," Zeph protested. "It took me about 15 years to get really good at it," Sarah agreed. "But once you understand the principles, you can adapt to new conditions pretty quickly." Zeph's tail twitched with skepticism. "My rifle's computer can calculate all those variables in microseconds and adjust the shot automatically. Why would you choose such an inefficient method?" Sarah smiled. "Because computers can be jammed, hacked, or disabled. This," she patted her rifle, "works regardless of electronic warfare, electromagnetic pulses, or power failures. It works in any atmosphere, on any world, as long as I have ammunition." When they reached the Outer Rim station, Battalion 12 was waiting. The unit was clearly a mixed bag, older soldiers, species considered less suited for frontline combat, and those recovering from injuries. Their commanding officer was a grizzled Tarakan named Colonel Vex, whose reptilian features bore the scars of decades of service. Colonel Vex examined the new arrivals with the weary expression of someone who had seen too many young soldiers come and go. When his eyes fell on Sarah and her ancient rifle, he actually paused. "Let me guess," he said, his voice carrying the rasp of old battle damage. "You're the human they sent me. The one with the museum piece." "Sarah-chun, sir. Ready for duty. I've heard about you already. Half the station's talking about the human who thinks she can fight the hegemony with the antique." He studied her for a long moment. "I've served with humans before. Good people, but your species tends to be overly optimistic about your capabilities." Sarah maintained her attention position. I'm here to serve, sir. Colonel Vex assigned quarters and began integrating the new recruits into existing squads. Sarah found herself paired with Zeph the Altarian and two other soldiers. Corns, a heavily built Rakan whose natural stone-like skin made him nearly indestructible, and Thizes, insectoid Klaxon whose compound eyes could track multiple targets simultaneously. Their first patrol assignment was simple. Check the mining stations in the Kepler 439 system for signs of hegemony scouts. Intelligence suggested minimal threat, making it perfect for breaking in new recruits. As they prepared their equipment, Sergeant Mills, a veteran Tarakan, briefed them on standard patrol procedures. His briefing focused heavily on the advanced weapons and sensors available to the team. Zeph, your energy rifle should handle most threats we're likely to encounter. Corns, your plasma cannon gives us heavy fire support. Thizes, your targeting system can coordinate our fire for maximum efficiency. He glanced at Sarah. Chun, try to stay out of the way and don't shoot unless something gets close enough for that thing to actually hurt it. The squad's other members exchanged glances. They weren't being cruel, but it was clear they viewed Sarah as dead weight. A human with a primitive weapon couldn't possibly contribute to a modern military operation. During the pre-mission equipment check, Sarah requested additional ammunition for her rifle. The quartermaster, an efficient Dendrian with bark-like skin, looked puzzled. How much ammunition could you possibly need for such a simple weapon? He asked. Standard load for extended patrol is 200 rounds, Sarah replied. The quartermaster's branch-like appendages rustled with amusement. 200? Even our heavy weapons specialists don't carry that much ammunition. Their energy packs last for thousands of shots. Different tools, different requirements, Sarah said simply. As they loaded onto the patrol ship Quick Strike, Zeph tried to make conversation. Have you considered upgrading your equipment? The Galactic Arsenal has some excellent human-compatible weapons. Plasma rifles, ion cannons, smart ammunition systems. Sarah secured her gear and checked her rifle one final time. I appreciate the suggestion, but I'll stick with what I know. But why limit yourself? Thizes clicked, her compound eyes reflecting genuine curiosity. Technology has advanced far beyond projectile weapons. Energy weapons are more accurate, more powerful, and require less maintenance. Sarah settled into her seat as the ship prepared for departure. Around her, the squad checked their sophisticated equipment, energy readings, power levels, targeting calibrations. Their weapons hummed with power and displayed readiness indicators on built-in screens. Her rifle made no sound at all. It simply waited, as it had for over 2 centuries, ready to do what it was designed to do. Sometimes, Sarah said quietly, the old ways work just fine. As the Quick Strike entered hyperspace, none of her squad mates could have imagined that within hours they would be desperately grateful for those old ways. The Outer Rim was about to become much more dangerous than anyone anticipated. The mining station orbiting Kepler 439c should have been bustling with activity. Instead, the Quick Strike approached a facility gone dark, its communication arrays silent and its docking bays eerily empty. This doesn't look like a routine inspection anymore, Sergeant Mills muttered as he studied the sensor readings. The station's main power is down, but life support is still functioning. Could be equipment failure, could be something else. Squad 7 prepared for boarding operations with practiced efficiency. Zeph powered up his energy rifle and checked the charge levels. Corns activated his plasma cannon, the weapon humming with contained energy. Thizes calibrated her targeting sensors, her compound eyes glowing softly as they synchronized with her weapon systems. Sarah simply loaded a fresh cartridge into her rifle and worked the bolt, chambering around. The metallic sound seemed unnaturally loud in the high-tech environment of their transport. Remember, Sergeant Mills briefed them as they approached the docking port. Unknown situation means maximum caution. We go in as a team, clear each section methodically, and report anything unusual immediately. The docking procedure completed with a soft thud and hiss of equalizing pressure. Mills led them through the airlock into the mining station's main corridor. Emergency lighting cast long shadows, and their footsteps echoed in the unusual silence. The station was designed to house 300 workers, but the corridors were completely empty. Personal belongings were scattered about as if people had left in a hurry, but there were no signs of violence or struggle. Life signs? Mills asked the Dizes. The Klaxon's compound eyes shifted color as she scanned. Negative on sentient life forms in this section. However, I am detecting some unusual energy signatures from the lower levels. They moved deeper into the station, clearing each section according to standard protocol. The cafeteria still had food on the tables, partially eaten meals abandoned mid-bite. The recreation area showed signs of interrupted activities, gaming tables with pieces scattered. Entertainment systems still running. It's like they all just vanished, Zeph whispered, his golden eyes wide as they reflected the emergency lighting. Sarah remained quiet, but she had noticed something the others had missed. There were scuff marks on the floor, subtle signs of equipment being moved quickly, and in several locations, she spotted small holes in the walls that looked suspiciously like projectile impacts. They reached the main elevator shaft that led to the mining operations below. The elevator car was stuck between floors, its control panel dark. Emergency stairs, Mills decided. Stay alert. If someone or something drove these people off, they might still be here. The stairwell was pitch black beyond their helmet lights. As they descended, the temperature dropped noticeably and their breath became visible in the cold air. After 3 flights, they reached the mining level. Here, finally. They found signs of what had happened. The main mining chamber was a vast excavation filled with sophisticated drilling equipment and ore processing machinery. But the machinery had been systematically destroyed. Drill heads were melted, processing units were torn apart, and the main computer terminals were reduced to slag. Energy weapon impacts, Corns observed, his stone-like skin making him nearly invisible in the shadows. Plasma burns, ion scoring. Professional sabotage? Tice's sensors were working overtime. I'm reading trace residues consistent with hegemony military equipment. They were here recently, possibly within the last few hours. Mills activated his communication gear to report their findings, but only Static answered. Communications are being jammed? We need to complete our reconnaissance and get back to the ship. That's when they heard it, a low humming sound from deeper in the mining complex. It was mechanical, rhythmic, and definitely not part of the station's normal operations. Stay together, Mills ordered. We investigate, but at the first sign of serious trouble, we withdraw. They moved through the destroyed mining equipment toward the source of the sound. The humming grew louder as they approached a section of the facility that had been carved deeper into the asteroid's surface, rounding a corner. They finally found what they were looking for. 3 hegemony assault mechs stood in a triangular formation around what appeared to be a massive drilling operation. Each mech was 12 feet tall, armored with energy-deflecting plating, and equipped with an array of weapons that could level buildings. They were methodically extracting something from deep within the asteroid. Extraction operation, Dizes whispered into their communication system. They're mining something the original colonists found? Mills studied the situation through his scope. 3 heavy assault units. Our standard equipment might not be sufficient for a direct confrontation. Zeph checked his energy rifle's charge. My weapon can penetrate light armor, but those are military-grade mechs. It would take sustained fire to bring down even one of them. Corns hefted his plasma cannon. I might be able to disable one if I get close enough, but the other 2 would cut me down before I could reload. They watched as the mechs continued their work, their movements precise and efficient. Occasionally, one would turn to scan the perimeter with sensors that glowed red in the darkness. We should withdraw and call for reinforcements, Mills decided. This is beyond our mission parameters. But as they began to pull back, one of the mechs suddenly stopped its work. Its sensor array swiveled directly toward their position, and an alarm began to sound throughout the complex. Contact! Mills shouted. We've been detected. The 3 mechs turned toward them in unison, their weapon systems powering up with an ominous whine. Energy began to build in their primary cannons. and their targeting lasers painted red dots across the mining chamber. Zeph, Corns, and Thizes immediately took cover behind the destroyed mining equipment and began returning fire. Energy beams and plasma bolts filled the air, illuminating the chamber with brilliant flashes of light, but their weapons, designed for infantry combat, barely scratched the mech's advanced armor. The energy blast that could kill a person outright simply dissipated harmlessly against the hegemony's military-grade plating. Meanwhile, the mech's return fire was devastating. Their plasma cannons tore chunks out of the mining equipment, melting through metal supports and turning their cover into molten slag. "We need to fall back," Mills shouted over the sound of weapons fire. "Our equipment isn't designed for this." The squad began a fighting withdrawal, but the mechs were advancing steadily, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. It was clear that within minutes they would be overrun. That's when Sarah, who had been silent since the fighting began, finally spoke up. "I need a clear shot," she said calmly, working the bolt on her rifle. The chaos of battle filled the mining chamber as Squad 7 found themselves pinned down by 3 advancing hegemony assault mechs. Energy weapons crackled through the air, turning their cover into molten metal, while the mech's heavy footsteps grew closer with each passing second. "Chun, stay down," Sergeant Mills shouted over the weapons fire. "That pop gun of yours won't even scratch their paint." Sarah ignored the order. She had been studying the mechs carefully, watching their movement patterns, noting the joints and sensor clusters. While her squadmates focused on the obvious targets, the heavily armored chest plates and weapon mounts, she was looking for something else entirely, moving with practiced stealth. She worked her way to a position behind a half-melted ore processor. The machine provided just enough cover while giving her a clear line of sight to the lead mech, which was now less than 50 meters away. Zeph's energy rifle discharged again, the beam striking the mech's shoulder armor and dispersing harmlessly. "It's not working. Their armor is too advanced." Corns fired his plasma cannon, the bolt striking the same mech center mass. The explosion lit up the chamber, but when the smoke cleared, the mech continued its advance without even pausing. "Fall back to the elevator," Mills ordered. "We need to get out of here." But Sarah remained in position, her rifle trained on the lead mech. She had found what she was looking for, a small gap in the armor plating where the mech's head unit connected to its main body. It was perhaps 3 inches wide, barely visible even with her enhanced optics. The mech raised its arm cannon, energy building for what would certainly be a killing shot against Corns's position. Sarah took a deep breath, let half of it out, and gently squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report was sharp and surprisingly loud in the enclosed space, cutting through the whine of energy weapons like a knife through silk. The mech stopped mid-movement, its arm cannon powering down as its systems registered catastrophic damage to its central processor. For a moment, the entire chamber fell silent except for the dying whine of charging weapons. Then the 12-foot-tall assault mech toppled backward like a felled tree, crashing to the ground with an impact that shook dust from the ceiling. "What the hell?" Tice's compound eyes swiveled to look at Sarah, then at the fallen mech. "How did you?" The other 2 mechs immediately shifted their attention to this new threat. Their sensor arrays focused on Sarah's position, analyzing the trajectory of the shot that had just killed their companion. Their targeting computers, designed to track energy signatures and metal projectiles, struggled to classify the primitive kinetic weapon. Sarah was already moving. She rolled left as the first mech's plasma cannon obliterated her former position, then came up behind a support beam. Working the bolt on her rifle, she ejected the spent cartridge and chambered a fresh round. The second mech had a more complex design than the first, with additional armor plating around its critical systems. But Sarah had spent 15 years learning to find the weak points in seemingly impenetrable targets. Every piece of equipment, no matter how advanced, had vulnerabilities. She spotted it, a cooling vent near the mech's power core, necessary to prevent the reactor from overheating during extended combat operations. It was a tiny opening, perhaps 2 inches across, protected by a mesh screen designed to keep debris out while allowing airflow. The mech turned toward her position, its targeting laser painting a red dot on the beam she was hiding behind. Sarah knew she had perhaps 2 seconds before the beam would be vaporized along with everything behind it. She stepped out from cover, raised her rifle, and fired in one smooth motion that had been drilled into her muscle memory through thousands of hours of practice. The bullet, a simple piece of lead and copper traveling at 2,800 feet per second, punched through the cooling vent's mesh screen and penetrated deep into the mech's power core. The explosion was immediate and spectacular. The mech's reactor containment failed, sending a pillar of blue-white energy erupting through the chamber ceiling. When the light faded, nothing remained of the second mech except scattered pieces of armor and a crater in the floor. Squad 7 stared in stunned silence. 2 assault mechs, each worth more than a small starship and capable of leveling city blocks, had been destroyed by a woman with a rifle her great-grandfather had carried. The third mech, apparently equipped with learning protocols, had already begun adapting to this unexpected threat. It activated additional armor plating around its critical systems and began moving in an unpredictable pattern to avoid giving Sarah a clear shot, but it made one crucial mistake. It assumed Sarah was limited to the same targeting methods as every other warrior it had encountered. Sarah didn't aim for joints or cooling vents this time. Instead, she studied the mech's movement pattern for 30 seconds, calculating distance, timing, and the mechanical limitations of its mobility system. When the mech paused to fire at Korn's position, Sarah aimed not at where it was, but at where she knew it would be when its shot cycle completed. The rifle cracked again. This time, the bullet struck the mech's primary sensor cluster just as it was pivoting to acquire a new target. The impact severed critical data cables and destroyed the targeting computer that coordinated its weapon systems. Blinded and confused, the mech began firing randomly, its shots going wide and striking the chamber walls. It stumbled backward, trying to use its secondary sensors to locate the threat. Sarah worked the bolt again, chambering her 4th round. This time she had a clear shot at the mech's main power coupling, a junction that fed energy from the reactor to all primary systems. The 4th shot ended the engagement. The mech seized up as its power systems failed, then slowly toppled forward to crash among the mining equipment. Silence fell over the chamber. The smell of ozone and melted metal filled the air, along with something else, the distinctive scent of gunpowder from Sarah's rifle. Zeph was the first to speak, his voice filled with disbelief. 4 shots. 4 shots and you destroyed 3 assault mechs. Tice's compound eyes were fixed on Sarah's rifle. That weapon, how is that possible? Our intelligence reports say those mechs are immune to kinetic weapons. Sarah ejected the empty magazine and inserted a fresh one. They're immune to the kinetic weapons you're used to fighting. Plasma projectiles, ion bolts, energy-based ammunition. But they weren't designed to deal with old-fashioned bullets. Korns hefted his plasma cannon, looking at it with new doubt. But the armor plating is designed to disperse energy, Sarah finished. Plasma, laser, ion beams. But a simple metal projectile? That's not what their engineers were thinking about when they built these things. Sergeant Mills emerged from cover, his expression mixing amazement with calculation. The hegemony has been fighting the same types of weapons for decades. Their armor, their tactics, their entire defensive philosophy is built around energy weapons. Sarah nodded. Sometimes the best answer to advanced technology is something so simple they forgot to plan for it. With the immediate threat eliminated, Squad 7 had time to examine what the hegemony mechs had been extracting from deep within the asteroid. The drilling operation was far more extensive than it had initially appeared, with excavation tunnels extending hundreds of meters into the rock. This wasn't a random attack, Sergeant Mills observed as they approached the drilling site. They came here specifically for whatever they found down there. Vyses activated her deep-range sensors, scanning the excavated areas. I'm detecting unusual mineral compositions. Extremely rare elements, some I don't recognize at all. At the bottom of the excavation, they discovered the answer. The hegemony forces had been extracting large quantities of crystalline structures that glowed with an inner light. The crystals were unlike anything in the standard galactic mineral database, pulsing with energy that made their scanner equipment behave erratically. "I've seen references to something like this in classified reports," Mills said quietly. Zero-point energy crystals, theoretical power sources that could revolutionize space travel and weapons technology. Zeph examined one of the smaller crystals the mechs had left behind. "If the hegemony is collecting these, they're planning something big. These crystals could power weapons capable of destroying entire star systems." Sarah knelt beside one of the fallen mechs, examining the damage her rifle had caused. The entry points were small and precise, but the internal damage was catastrophic. The bullets had struck critical components with surgical accuracy, causing cascade failures throughout the mech's systems. "We need to get this information back to command immediately," Mills decided. "But first, we need to secure whatever crystals we can and document the entire site." As they worked to gather evidence and samples, their communication equipment suddenly crackled to life. The voice that came through was distorted by interference, but the words were clear enough. "Galactic Defense Force Patrol, this is Captain Vorthek of the Hegemony Cruiser Shadowblade. You have interfered with a legitimate mining operation and destroyed valuable military equipment." Mills grabbed the communication device. "This is Sergeant Mills, GDF Squad 7. You are conducting illegal operations in Federation space." The legalities are irrelevant," the Hegemony captain replied. "You have demonstrated capabilities that were not anticipated. We require information about the weapons and tactics you employed." Sarah looked up from her examination of the mechs. Something in the alien captain's tone suggested this was more than routine military bluster. "What kind of information?" Mills asked. "Your kinetic projectile weapons proved effective against our armor systems. This contradicts all our tactical projections. We wish to understand how this is possible." Zeph's golden eyes widened with realization. "They're not angry about the mining operation. They're worried about the rifle." Sarah stood up, brushing dust off her fatigues. "They should be." The communication crackled again. "We are prepared to offer terms for the surrender of your kinetic weapons specialist and her equipment for analysis. In exchange, your squad will be permitted to leave this system unharmed." "Absolutely not," Mills responded immediately. "Then you have 30 minutes to prepare for boarding operations. The Shadowblade carries a full battalion of assault troops and sufficient firepower to reduce this asteroid to particles. Your demonstration of primitive weapons technology, while amusing, will not be repeated." The communication cut off, leaving Squad 7 in ominous silence. Dizes activated her long-range sensors. Large vessel approaching from the outer system. Hegemony cruiser class, heavily armed. Estimated arrival time, 28 minutes. Corns hefted his plasma cannon, though after witnessing Sarah's performance, he seemed less confident in its effectiveness. A full battalion against 5 soldiers. Even with Chin's rifle, those odds are not encouraging. Sarah was already thinking tactically. What kind of forces does a hegemony battalion typically carry? 200 assault troops, Mills replied. Mix of species, mostly equipped with energy weapons and light armor. Plus officers in powered combat suits and heavy weapons teams. Any vehicles? Probably a dozen light mechs, maybe some assault platforms. Sarah nodded, working through the calculations. I have about 160 rounds left. That's not enough for a sustained engagement against those numbers. Zeph looked confused. But you just proved that your weapon is superior to their technology. Against 3 isolated targets, yes, Sarah explained. But ammunition is finite. Energy weapons can fire thousands of shots before depleting their power cells. I can't engage 200 enemies with what I'm carrying. Mills studied their tactical situation. Their transport ship, the Quick Strike, was fast but lightly armed. It could probably outrun a cruiser, but not while carrying the crystal samples they needed to evacuate. There has to be something else we can do, he muttered. Some advantage we haven't considered. Sarah was examining her equipment bag more carefully now, inventorying exactly what she had brought. Besides her rifle and standard ammunition, there were several items her squadmates hadn't paid attention to during the initial deployment. Actually, she said slowly, there might be something. She opened a sealed compartment in her bag and withdrew what looked like another rifle, though this one was significantly larger and more robust than the Springfield, where her first rifle was elegant and worn smooth by decades of use. This weapon was purely functional, designed for a very specific purpose. "What is that?" Dizes asked, her compound eyes focusing on the new weapon. Sarah assembled the rifle with practiced motions, locking the barrel into place and loading a magazine that contained rounds nearly twice the size of her standard ammunition. "This is a Barrett M107A1 anti-materiel rifle, 50 caliber rounds." She looked up at her squadmates, who were staring at the weapon with growing interest. It was designed to disable vehicles, equipment, and fortifications at extreme range. Mills examined the massive rifle with new appreciation. Range? Effective range is about 2 kilometers. Maximum range is closer to 7 kilometers under ideal conditions. Corns whistled, a sound like grinding stone. You can engage targets at 7 kilometers with a projectile weapon. The bullets travel at about 2,900 feet per second, Sarah explained. At that velocity, they can punch through light armor, engine blocks, equipment housings. Pretty much anything that isn't specifically designed to stop large-caliber kinetic projectiles. Zeph was beginning to understand the implications. The hegemony forces won't expect engagement at that range. Their tactics are built around energy weapons, which are most effective at close to medium distances. Sarah nodded. And their armor is optimized for energy dispersal, not kinetic impact. A 50 caliber round will go through their combat suits like they're made of paper. Mills looked at the massive rifle, then at the tactical display showing the approaching cruiser. 200 troops. How many rounds do you have for that thing? Sarah checked her ammunition. 40 rounds. But with proper positioning and target selection, 40 rounds should be enough. Enough for what? Sarah smiled grimly, the expression of someone who had done this before. Enough to teach the hegemony why humans earned their place in this galaxy. Squad 7 had 20 minutes to prepare before the hegemony cruiser Shadowblade arrived. Sarah studied the asteroid's surface topology through the mining station's external cameras, mapping potential shooting positions and escape routes, while her squadmates gathered intelligence on the approaching enemy force. The cruiser is maintaining standard approach patterns, Vises reported from the sensor station. They expect minimal resistance. Landing craft are already deploying. I count 6 dropships, each carrying approximately 30 troops. Sarah found what she was looking for, a rocky outcropping on the asteroid's surface that provided an elevated position with clear lines of sight to the likely landing zones. The position was nearly 2 kilometers from the mining station, well beyond the effective range of standard infantry weapons. I need to get to the surface, she announced, shouldering the Barrett rifle. That position will give me overlapping fields of fire on all their probable landing sites. Mills studied the tactical display. That puts you completely alone out there. If they detect your position and send forces after you, we can't provide support. That's the idea, Sarah replied. They'll expect you to defend the mining station. They won't be looking for a sniper at extreme range. Zeph activated his equipment scanner. What about us? What do we do while you're engaging the landing forces? Create a diversion. Make them think the main defense is here at the station. Use your energy weapons, make lots of noise and light. Draw their attention while I work. Sarah sealed her helmet and checked her suit's life support systems. The asteroid had no atmosphere, so she would be operating in vacuum conditions. Her rifle was designed to function in such environments, but it would require careful thermal management to prevent the barrel from overheating in the absence of air cooling. As she prepared to leave the station, Sergeant Mills grabbed her arm. Chun, are you sure about this? That's a full battalion out there. Even with that rifle, if they locate you... Sarah looked at the veteran Tarakan, seeing genuine concern in his reptilian features. Sergeant, my great-grandfather fought at Guadalcanal with this exact model rifle against overwhelming odds. My grandfather held the line at the chosen reservoir. My father defended the Antarctic mining colonies against raiders who thought humans were easy targets. She checked her ammunition one final time. They were wrong then, and the hegemony is wrong now. The journey to the surface took 8 minutes through the station's maintenance tunnels. Sarah emerged from an emergency airlock onto the asteroid's rocky surface, the vast emptiness of space stretching above her. In the distance, she could see the running lights of the approaching hegemony cruiser. Growing larger by the minute, the selected position was perfect, a natural depression in the rocks that provided both concealment and a stable shooting platform. Sarah set up the Barrett rifle, extended its bipod legs, and began range calculations. The asteroid's low gravity would affect bullet trajectory, but the lack of atmosphere meant no wind resistance or air density variations. Through her scope, she watched the first hegemony drop ships detach from the cruiser and begin their descent. The ships were sleek, angular craft designed for rapid deployment of assault forces. Their pilots flew with the confidence of troops who had never faced serious opposition. Squad 7, this is Chun, she transmitted on a secure channel. Enemy landing craft inbound. 6 ships descending to positions around the mining station. Beginning engagement in 30 seconds. Copy that, Chun, Mills responded. We're in position. Light show starts when you take your first shot. Sarah tracked the lead drop ship through her scope, watching it settle onto a flat area about 300 meters from the mining station. The ship's landing ramp began to lower, and she could see armored figures moving inside. Preparing to disembark, she adjusted her aim point, accounting for the asteroid's gravity and the range to target. The first shot needed to be perfect. It would determine the success or failure of their entire defense. The hegemony troops began filing out of the dropship in standard assault formation. They moved with professional precision, their powered armor gleaming under the asteroid's weak sunlight. Their weapons were ready. Energy cells charged and targeting systems active. None of them were. Looking for threats at extreme. Range. Sarah centered her crosshairs on the drop. Ship's engine compartment and squeezed the trigger. The Barrett's .50 caliber round crossed the 2-kilometer gap in less than 3 seconds. It struck the dropship's primary engine with devastating effect, the kinetic impact rupturing fuel lines and control systems. The ship erupted in a brilliant explosion that sent debris raining. Across the landing zone, the troops who had just disembarked were thrown to the ground by the blast. Several were caught by flying wreckage, their advanced armor offering no protection against chunks of metal moving at high velocity. Direct hit, Mills reported. That got their attention. Sarah was already tracking the second dropship, which was landing on the far side of the mining station. The pilot, seeing his companion's destruction, was trying to keep the mining equipment between his ship and the suspected threat location. It didn't matter. Sarah's position gave her angles on all the landing zones. The second shot took out the dropship's main rotor assembly, sending the craft into an uncontrolled tumble that ended in another spectacular explosion. More hegemony troops found themselves stranded on the asteroid's surface, cut off from their transportation and facing an enemy they couldn't see. Chun. They're trying to triangulate your position, Dices reported. Multiple ships are launching sensor drones. Sarah had expected this. She shifted position slightly, moving to a secondary shooting spot she had identified during her initial survey. The movement took her out of the sensor drone's search pattern while maintaining her field of fire. The remaining 4 dropships were landing simultaneously now, their pilots trying to overwhelm the sniper with multiple targets. Troops were pouring out and immediately taking cover, while officers barked orders through their communication systems. Sarah's third shot caught a hegemony officer who was standing in the open, trying to coordinate his scattered forces. The .50 caliber round punched through his powered armor like it was made of foil, the impact sending him flying backward in the spray of debris. The effect on enemy morale was immediate and dramatic. The hegemony troops, accustomed to facing energy weapons they could defend against, suddenly found themselves under attack by something that ignored their most advanced protection. Panic began to spread through their ranks. "Fourth dropship is launching again," Zeph reported. "They're trying to evacuate." Sarah tracked the ascending craft through her scope. The pilot was pulling maximum acceleration, trying to escape the kill zone before the sniper could target him. But the ship was still within range, and its engines made an excellent target. The fourth shot sent the dropship spiraling out of control, its engine compartment venting atmosphere and fuel. The ship managed to limp back toward the cruiser, but it was clearly out of the fight. Now the real work began. Nearly 150 hegemony troops were stranded on the asteroid's surface, spread across multiple landing zones but all within range of Sarah's position. They had cover, they had numbers, and they had enough firepower to level the mining station, but they had never faced a human sniper with a rifle designed to destroy vehicles. Sarah settled in for a long engagement, knowing that each shot had to count. The Barrett rifle kicked against her shoulder as she began the systematic elimination of an entire enemy battalion, one carefully aimed round at a time.